I wonder about translators and why they felt the need to make the prophets especially sound so fancy. You ever noticed, if you're reading through the prophets, I know you do this for fun, how it all sounds so fancy, right? Granted, it's good poetry. Much of it is good poetry. And part of it is because the prophets, Isaiah in particular today, the prophets are speaking words that they believe to be given by God, and so you have to use God language, right? And Isaiah chapter 2 is no exception. This is prophet speak. These are words that push us well ahead in time and space to the promised time, when misery is ended and God reigns supreme. And so this passage in my translation starts with, "in the days to come." And in Mary's translation, it starts with, "in the final days," or "in the end of time." Flowery, fancy language that's meant to get us thinking. But I wonder if the prophet's first draft wasn't a little simpler. Now, my Hebrew dictionary tells me that the word under translation here is a word that suggests a conclusion of things. The end of days scenario is what's in mind. Even so, the poet in me would have taken a different approach. I would have gone with, "one of these days, one of these days." These are words of promise too, believe it or not. They are words that suggest the hearer will get what's coming to them. And as I mentioned to the kids, that's not always something to be excited about. But they can be words of hope. They can, if they're offered to people who hope. If the hearers are those who long for justice, for relief or protection, for salvation, for those folks, for us folk, one of these days, or in the days to come, or someday soon, or in the end, at the end of things. All of these phrases resonate because they are words that look to a future that is beyond trouble, a future full of promise and joy and light. And that is why the prophets are heard so often at this time of year, and Isaiah especially. Because Isaiah, for me at least, Isaiah is the prophet of the almost. He tells us about the almost, that thing right there. And in telling us about what's coming, he sets before us a nearly impossible ideal. That all nations will be like-minded, streaming to the wisdom of the Holy One. And that all nations will likewise be willing to submit to that same holy judgment. That all nations might be united in peaceful endeavor. These are the promises that Isaiah is privileged to bring. And with each utterance, Isaiah says, not yet. Maybe not in our lifetime. But one of these days, However you translate it, those prophetic words ring with the harmonic of hope. And down the ages, these words have always found sympathetic ears and hearts and minds. They do so even today. Even though the timing of these promises remains a mystery of frustrating proportions. Even to the people of Jesus' day. In fact, the timing is a mystery even to Jesus. No one knows, Jesus says. Not the angels in heaven, not the Son, just the Father. And that little tidbit always catches us by surprise. The disciples went to Jesus for answers. These were people who were well versed in the texts of prophecy. They have read and debated the most significant pieces, the things that they think apply to their lives right now. They have parsed the grammar of all the prophets. And they lived at a time when the faithful were very sure that it was long past time for God to relieve their suffering once and for all. So of course they want answers. They want details. There have been regular debates on the how and the when of the coming of God's kingdom. In fact, the disciples are engaged in such a debate in Matthew's gospel. Even as they arrive in a bustling capital at the height of festival season, ready for the Passover, if you'll remember. And they are part of the inner circle. They are eager for a sign. They want some insider information. Because they have come to believe in Jesus as something more than a prophet, so surely Jesus will know. Whatever Jesus says to them here will carry some weight. So imagine their surprise as Jesus argues that the how and the when, beyond being unknown to him, don't matter. He reminds them that the timing is God's business and no one else's. When will it be? They want a schedule. They want to be able to mark their calendar and save the date. And Jesus doesn't give them that. He gives them nothing but advice. It will come like a thief in the night, he says, this day of the Son of Man. And in an interesting sidebar, he says, remember, if the man knew when his house was going to be robbed, he would have taken precautions and made it stop. It will come like a thief in the night, so pay attention. Pay attention. Be aware. Know that you will have to endure some uncertainty. Know that strange things will happen all around, just like before the flood. Pay attention. You must be ready. That's all he says. You must be ready. And so you must be faithful. I would love to hear a report on the disciples' reaction to this untidy bit of news, because I think it would be further proof that faithful people, even faithful people, don't really like waiting all that much. It will come. Jesus does not deny that. This time of righteousness and peace will come. This time of joy and judgment will come, but you can't mark it on the calendar. You can't predict it by the phases of the moon. Jesus' advice here is that the work of the faithful is to wait faithfully. And hope is what encapsulates faithful waiting. The enduring the now while you're encouraged by the almost. That's what hope is. Hope is foregoing certainty for the excitement and promise of one of these days. Hope is the first step in our Advent journey year after year. And I'm willing to bet that as many Advent cycles as you might have endured, the hoping and the waiting never gets easier. Be that as it may, we remain hopeful. We remain hopeful, even though the promises of God seem just as distant and just as difficult to see as they did on that day in Jerusalem or on that night in Bethlehem. In all of those moments, in all the times in between, the prophet's words must be enough. The promise of God must be enough. Our encounter with Jesus, however that happens for you, whether it's in the cradle or on the cross, risen in glory or reaching out from Scripture or sustaining us through the Spirit, all of this, though hard to fathom and difficult to understand, all of it must be enough to bring us hope, to keep us faithful in our waiting. Yes, the decorations are up and the radio stations and the mall are playing Christmas songs until you'll be sick of them. And I'm going to make you wait a little while. The stories of the infant Jesus will come. The words that we long for will find their way into our hearts once again. The promise of God will find its way into our gathering and our gifting, into our sharing and celebrating. Because the closer we get to the Christmas story, the sharper the focus is for our ancient hopefulness. But until then, we wait. Sure that God is with us in our waiting, sure that the promises are as real as the pews you sit on and the people you sit next to. But we wait. Because one of these days,